Welcome to Step in the Story and our May book chat. I'm Barbara Tanner-Wallace. I'm here with my bestie, Donna, Alward, and we're going to be talking about Only the Beautiful. But before we do, any updates on your book, Donna?
No. I'm sort of in that hurry up and wait stage. So I've sent in edits. It's gone to copy editing, and I've sent in like my bio and like reading group questions and all of that stuff. But now I'm just waiting for, and I sent in a whole list of titles because we're changing the title. Now I'm just waiting to hear back. So I'm kind of in that holding pattern.
Okay. I think we're getting close, though. I think it'll be early 2024 that we hear.
I hope so. Either way, it's just, you know what it's like when you're just waiting. So it's just the waiting. I'm kind of stalking my email.
That's 90% of the writing career.
It kind of is. Really, no joke.
So
that's kind of where I am. I'm just stalking my email.
Speaking of stalking, I plan to stalk Susan Meissner for the rest of my life.
Okay, well, we can start in San Antonio when we're there.
Yeah. Susan, if you're watching, please be my mentor, because anyway, I didn't put that. I was going to put on Twitter that I was going to stalk her, and then I realized that might possibly get me in trouble. But this month's title, which is Only the Beautiful by Susan Meissner, like I said, I hope people read it. If not, you better be reading it next week. It was probably, I know we say this every month, but this was probably my favorite book of the year. I think it surpassed the other two, Things Past Telling and House of Eve. I've never been this emotionally invested in a book before.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, because I think you were more emotionally invested than I was, but I was in more awe of like the structure and the craft that went into it. I mean, I love the book. It was a complete page turner for me. And I have some thoughts on that later, of course, but yeah, I kept reading and thinking, like, the way she structured it, it takes a master to do it that effectively and whatnot. So I think I was just so in awe of the construction of it. And then, I mean, that's not to say I wasn't emotionally invested, because I messaged you and said I cried at the end.
I think I was, well, we should back up. It's the story of two women, 10 years apart. One woman is a very young woman of 17, and she's fighting to keep her unborn child. And then the other one is a nanny who has returned from World War II. She was in Vienna working, and then she went to Switzerland, and she's back after World War II. And what it is really is a look at the practice of eugenics, which, for those who aren't familiar with it, it was a movement that espoused strengthening the gene pool by forced sterilization, segregation, and social isolation. And it was practiced by the Nazis, but it was also practiced here in the U.S., which a lot of people don't realize, and I think actually practiced here longer than in Nazi.
Yeah, I think when we get through and it might have been in the author's note that she mentions that some of the laws were not overturned until like into the 70s, I think, or something. Like it's kind of crazy how. Anyway, we're going to get into that too, because it was one of those books that it's a heavy read, but and yet it's not, but it is. You know, like, it doesn't feel heavy, and I didn't feel completely weighed down reading it, because I just kept turning the pages, and I was really invested in the characters.
Yep.
So it was deceptively unbleak for me until I got to the end, and then I looked back on it, and then it was like, oh, that was a lot, you know?
Oh, see, my reaction was different, because at the front of the book, the first half of the book, where we have Rosie, who's fighting to keep her child, and she's been placed in an insane asylum. And I don't want to spoil it, but there are reasons why she is, and it's on the back cover, so I'm not spoiling it too much.
Right.
There's so much powerlessness to her story that there were times when I felt myself unable to breathe, because you just knew she was not going to escape. And no matter how much she argued her point, no one was listening. And you just knew, like, all these forces were acting upon her, and she had no agency, no power. And I just kind of felt like my breath was being squeezed all the time from that.
Yeah.
And in the second book, the second half I did too. So I think that's when I said I was emotionally invested. I really wanted to, like, scream at these people. I was so angry at some of these characters.
You know, it's funny too, because I think I told you last night I'd started another book just before this, and then I put it aside, and I'd only got like maybe 10 or 15 pages in. And then I put it aside to read this one because it was coming up. And so I went back to that other book last night, and it also is actually about like when we get into Helen's portion in the second half in Vienna, it's about that same institution and with children. And I couldn't read it. Like I had to like just pick up something else that was lighter. And that's when I really realized how affected I was. Like I hadn't really realized how affected I was by what had happened in Only the Beautiful until I went to read another book with a similar setting. And then I was like, I can't do it. I just can't do it right now. I don't have room for it in here.
No.
So.
But what I liked about it was that Susan Meissner's language was very accessible. It's not preachy. She's not hammering this lecture about what was wrong over your head. You just instinctively, as you're going along with the characters, going, this isn't right. This isn't right. And I think there's only one really big lecture. It's because one of the characters loses her temper and starts screaming about what they're doing. But never is there any kind of talk about it other than, you learn about it and you experience more than you're being talked at, which sometimes in those books, it's very much a lecture in the disguise of fiction. This was,
and I think maybe that's why I wasn't. It was when I said it was deceptively unbleak. I think it was because I wasn't being lectured to, or I wasn't being told how horrific it was. I was along for the ride.
But I think that is why I was emotionally affected. I'm one of those people where if you tell me it's horrific, I will have, it's sort of like when you're told you have to watch this TV show because it's the best TV show ever. Like I've got a list of shows I've been told I have to watch that I haven't watched because I'm like, because I'm a big old, and I'm like this stubborn little brat who's like, no, I'm not going to watch Ted Lasso.
You're lost.
So, the fact that they weren't lecturing me, but I was experiencing it, I think that's why it had such an effect on me. No one told me it was awful. I could just see that it was awful. So, how much did you know about the eugenics program?
I didn't know a lot, to be honest, especially not in the U.S. I was, of course, a little bit more familiar in Germany, and because that was a huge thing. Yeah. It was a little more, I think, perhaps insidious in the U.S. in that, like it's really disturbing when you think, well, that's not going to happen here.
Yeah.
And there are parts where Helen's like, it's already happening here. Like, and so I didn't know as much. So I was far more surprised by the first half and what happened with Rosie than I was in the second half, which was, a lot of it is in Vienna, and then because it jumps back and forth between, during the war and then where she is after the war, which is again part of that brilliant construction.
Right. And I think that that's one of the things that people will like about this is it sort of contrasts what the US way is versus the Nazi. And the Nazi way, yes, is very insidious in that they're very upfront about they're eliminating the weakness and making a master race. And I think the US couched it much more as we're helping these women.
We're providing a service.
And I think that's what made it
relieving a burden. And it's like,
and they believed it. I think these people really believed they were doing right, and which makes it scary. And I think she did a great job of contrasting the two, because it's very easy to read a book about the Nazi program and think, well, yeah, they're Nazis, they're awful. I mean, is there anything the Nazis did that was good? I mean, it's but when you see it portrayed the same way, in the U.S., I think that she did a great job of. And she did a great job of bouncing back and forth, because what she does in both timelines, both stories, is go back and forth between the present and the past, so that you see how they got to where they are.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that.
Me too. So there's a number of antagonists in this book. like a bunch. Like,
Oh, there's many.
there's, you know, there's Dr. Townsend. There's people who even aren't intentionally antagonists, like Truman, or like the father of the family in Germany, or in Vienna.
His name is Johann. Yeah.
And but all whose attitudes and perspectives all contribute to the awful things that happen. But the one that you had mentioned that, you know, I just kind of wanted to focus on because she's so easy to hate is Celine.
Yep.
Who is
so when you say Rosie's foster mom.
Yeah. So for the people who haven't read it yet, and I won't give too much away, but Rosie ends up living with Celine and Truman, who were basically her parents' bosses when she's orphaned. Yep. And they take her in. So Celine is, yes, her foster mom / boss, because she makes her maid.
And I wanted to smack her so many times. And I made a comment on Twitter that I said, there's a character in this book that I want to punch. And Susan Meissner tweets back, just, if it's the one I think of, I wanted to punch her when I was writing her.
Yeah.
So punchable.
She really is, because she, and again, it kind of ties into the theme of like, I'm doing you a favor by treating you this way, or by doing this or whatever, because her whole thing was, instead of really treating Rosie like family, she became basically the maid / housekeeper. And it was all because, you know, when you leave here, then you'll have a skill. But really, it was free labor for her and a way to keep Rosie on the outside. And so, yeah, she was really unlikable. That being said, you know, I also found her really insecure. And I felt like there are a couple of times when she drinks too much and then she says too much.
Yep.
And I really feel like when someone does that, it's coming from a place of pain. Now, because she wasn't a main character, we don't know sort of what that whole secret wound is for her. But I did get the sense that she's an intensely unhappy woman, and takes that out on other people by making sure that they're miserable too.
Well, and it is hinted at, because there's a character, she has a son in the book who never stops coming home. Like, goes and gravitates towards his girlfriend's family and always seems to have plans. So you kind of do get the hint that she alienated a lot of people, including her son.
I think she's just lonely and bitter. And however, like, whether she just wasn't maternal with him, but whatever the reason is that goes way, way back that made her into a bitter and lonely woman.
Bitter old woman I wanted to punch.
Yeah. She was just it really bugs you when there's characters there and you know that they knew what was happening, and they not only did nothing to stop it, but they like proactively made sure that it happened.
Yeah, and that's one of the themes that I think running through it is the difference between complacency and complicity. And that, you know, it's very easy to say they did that, so they're bad. But then she looks at the idea that, okay, you did nothing. So what makes you better?
Yeah.
And, you know, the real whole idea of, you know, unless you stand up and have a voice in something. If you just
and even with Helen, like when she was in Austria, she tried, like, even though she failed, you know, at least she tried.
Yeah.
And didn't do nothing. And even then she's left feeling like and this is what makes a great protagonist, is even though she did so much,
she didn't think she did enough. She
did not think that she did enough, and she wanted to do more. And that's, she was really easy to love.
She was. Both those characters are really easy to identify with.
Yeah.
And like.
Yeah.
And they're very, very rootable. And I will say that at the end of the book, that's the other thing that's never happened to me before, but I audibly gasped towards the end. I don't want to spoil it. There is a line that a character says that I've never, usually I'm not shocked. That one I went, like that. And I don't usually do that.
Yeah. It's rare for me. But yeah, I read that and I was like, what? And then I was like,
oh my God,
of course
yeah.
you did. Of course you did.
And it's so, I know we're being very vague to the people who are listening because you honestly don't want to be spoiled for these things.
No, you don't.
And, but it's so well written, and it's brought around full circle with the starting of the loss, and it goes around a full circle and ends. So it's all good. What did you think of the ending?
Okay. So,
because she managed out, as awful and sad as this book is, it had a happy ending, a bittersweet ending.
It had I would consider it a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually, in my notes, I put that the ending was perfection. And because without spoiling it, it's like everything comes together, but then there's this extra bit. And of course, this goes again back to Susan's just great skill, but she just does this thing at the end that echoes back to the beginning and brings everything full circle in this great, it's almost a healing, like it's just beautiful.
It was
beautiful. I was really, really affected by the ending, and when it was poetic at the end. And when I got to that last page, I was crying, and I
did too.
Well, damn,
it takes a lot to make. It takes a lot to make
ending.
Because I am also, besides being stubborn, I'm kind of a hard-hearted bitch, and it takes a lot to make me cry. I'm telling you, this book, I've never been as affected with this book. It's very, very rare that I really, truly.
That's lovely.
And interestingly, this is your first Susan Meissner book.
Yes.
I read The Nature of Fragile Things, which came before this.
Yeah.
And I want to go back and read some of her other backlists, but
right.
I was not. The Nature of Fragile Things, the first, it's okay, so it's 400 pages. The first 200 pages, I could not put the book down.
Yep.
And then there's this great twist midway through, and then the book kind of fell apart for me. And I was disappointed that the back half did not live up to what the front half was.
Right.
And in this case, it did. It totally did.
Okay, so and interestingly enough, I find that interesting because it held right through for me as well. But the way she constructed this one, it's one of those things I've seen done before that it really hasn't worked for me, in that the first half of the book is Rosie and the second half of the book is Helen. There's a lot of times when you have two protagonists, you'll split it. So you'll do, some Rosie, then some Helen, and then some Rosie. But it wasn't. It was in two distinct parts, almost like two books.
Yep.
Right? But it never felt like it was disjointed. And I think it's because the character of Amaryllis is the link that ties both of them together. So that kind of thread held it together. And then when we get to the end, then everything wraps up the right way.
Yeah. And
the fact that she did that, and I was never disconnected or never felt confused, and the way that it was paced, because it really was a page turner, with the pacing was just so balanced. And then this beautiful ending, it's like a masterclass in structure and pacing.
It was. And I think what happened is the first half, it was all done with tension of what's going to happen? Is she going to survive? Is she going to get the baby? And then the second half, there's a mystery that's trying to be solved as well.
And we know something happened.
Right.
The first one is what's going to happen. And the second one is what did happen?
Exactly.
That leads her here.
Yeah, she did a great, great job.
She really did.
Yes. Welcome to another Gush Fest by Donna and Barb.
Right. Okay. So, did you like the title?
I did. It's funny. It's only
about bring the cover up.
Oh yeah. Wasn't it? I love the cover.
Yeah.
It didn't hit me till maybe halfway through what the meaning of it was, which was only the perfect were allowed to exist.
Right.
In your world. And I was like, oh, right. I mean, very much so in Germany.
So
only the Koreans were allowed to continue.
And I thought too, it's like this beautiful title and this beautiful cover. And then inside is this paradox of the ugliness of what it is to be beautiful. Right? Because anyway, it's a well-chosen title and a gorgeous cover.
It is. I wonder what someday I'll have to ask her what made her choose that title, because it is not a title that I would have necessarily come up with original, out the top of my head. So
yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is so much of what happens, especially to Rosie,
Yep.
but even some to Helen in the second half, it's not their fault, and yet they're continually, especially Rosie. Rosie is continually told that everything that happens to her is her own doing.
Yeah.
And so I told you, I made me feel helpless. Did it make you feel helpless at all, or did you?
It gave me rage.
It gave you rage.
So, I mean, I suppose that stems from the helplessness, but just so angry for her, and just give the kid a freaking break. This is just so. It made me. I really hated it when I really hated Dr. Townsend. I probably hated him more than Celine. And I hated it because he took everything about what made Rosie Rosie and turned it into something ugly.
Yep.
When it was actually something that she found quite beautiful, even though it was her secret. And it made it ugly. And then he put her through hell to quote unquote, heal her from it when it didn't require healing. So I was really, I have a real issue with, and I know we were going to talk about the whole thing about eugenics and
yeah.
But I have a whole thing about bodily autonomy. And so whether she was a minor or not, the idea that she had to submit to these treatments, this place that she had no control over what was going to happen to her and her unborn child and her after her child was born, that makes me really, that's a bruise that gets pushed on for me. So I have an issue with anyone who would try to dictate.
Yeah. Well, it also
happens to someone else's body.
It reminded me, it wasn't just physical autonomy, it was emotional autonomy.
Yeah.
And, it reminded me of other stories. And I know we've read one before, the woman was in an institution. And then I read one nonfiction one called The Woman Who Knew Too Much, or The Woman of No Importance.
Right.
I can't remember, where women were put in institutions for speaking their mind.
Yeah.
I mean, and Rosie's not the only one in there. There are women in there who said, I was attacked by so-and-so, and they were labeled liars because no one wanted to believe their story. No one wanted to listen to them. They had no voice whatsoever. And when they spoke out, they were put in asylums. They were told they were crazy.
This is in the 30s.
Yeah.
This is not Salem era.
I mean, and you think about eugenics was still going on, particularly to the African American community in the 50s and 60s. And, that was one of the things one of the arguments, another theme with this, and this is that we were talking about the eugenics, is that Helen talks to Dr. Townsend and she accuses him of playing God. And then he gives his argument about why he believes he's not playing God.
Right.
And I think that was very scary because we're seeing that same thing being played out now.
Yep.
And I mentioned to you that Margaret Sanger, who was a eugenics follower, her name is being invoked now in arguments.
Yeah.
And so it's not going away. And I think that we're still doing in some forms, because it wasn't all just forced sterilization. It was segregation and social isolation. Yeah. And we're still doing a lot of that. Well, I mean, obviously in a lot of ways, we're still segregating the Black community, maybe just not intentional, but a lot of other minorities and other vulnerable populations, exactly.
The disabled. So for example, I think those arguments that that Dr. Townsend was coming up with are really humans' ways of justifying their actions to perpetuate their own superiority. So, but really what they do is they take away someone's autonomy. And so, like, if you look beyond Rosie and you look at Brigida, the character in Helen's section, the vulnerable are used, are seen as less than. They are used for experiments and treatments. And
well, and their existence is very frequently, and if you ask parents who have children who are severely disabled, to them, these children brought a light and a joy to their lives. And people will argue, this is not a political discussion where we're getting for or against abortion, but people will say, well, you could have prevented that child from what kind of quality of life you could have prevented that child from being born. And the parent is saying, this child gave me great joy. Who are you to say this child does not have value? And I think that was one of the big things that was being argued back and forth. That who do you say that these people don't have value in society?
Well, and I think it's really, it comes down to humans treating other humans as less than human.
Yep.
And they do that even now. And it doesn't matter if it's reproductive rights or on whatever kind of rights we're talking about. Anytime that you have a group of people that are treating another section of the population as less than human, that's a problem.
Although it's interesting because it's very complex, because I have a relative who is she's quite a bit older than me, but she was mentally disabled. And she severely. She was functioning. I mean, she functioned. She lived in society. She had a job. She ended up marrying another man who was mentally disabled, and they lived near her parents. But her mother, when she one day asked the doctor, when the woman was in for an appendix, she had to have her appendix out, and the woman said, "Could you tie her tubes?" And the doctor's like, "No, I can't do that. You can't make the decision for her." And she's, "But if she gets pregnant, she is not capable of raising that child. I am, and I'm too old to raise it."
Yeah.
And like, I know that on the face of it, that's horribly wrong for her to be making these decisions for this, her daughter. But on the other hand, she's right. Her daughter would never have been able to raise that child. But yet, and you have to hope that nature understands that, and that she won't have wouldn't get pregnant. And she didn't. She was married for many, many years, and they never had children. But, so there's this gray area, and that's the argument Dr. Townsend gives. And like, for every 1 or 2% of those, though, there's 97% that he's wrong about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what was, so I was thinking of that when he was making his argument. I'm like, well, I know someone who made that exact argument, and it was right. But, just because he was right about, like, he points out that this girl who's got like a mental ability of 4 years old, and like, yeah, he was right about her, but he wasn't right about Rosie, and it's apples and oranges. You can't.
Yeah.
And I think that was what it was. Is they were painting everything with a broad brush and saying every single thing is a detriment to society and a genetic weakness. And like, certainly someone who's deaf or blind is not a weakness to society.
No.
And
or a liar.
Or a liar, yeah.
Who isn't a liar. Or even someone with a mental illness.
No. I mean, oh, good Lord, if they did mental illness, I'd be forced sterilized.
We would definitely have no issues with population.
No, every person that suffered from depression, every woman who got postpartum depression would be sterilized with like 2 seconds.
Well, actually, after I had postpartum depression, I made that choice. But I made that choice. No one made that choice for me.
But how many women suffer from PMS and postpartum depression, or just depression in general, and so many things, or every person who was sexually assaulted and suffered ramifications. I mean, so yeah, it was very infuriating to listen to.
Yeah, no, it's and it's I think you can't. I understand what you're saying, but I think on the whole, you have to look at, if we are going to paint with a broad brush, we've got to paint with the right brush, which is we have to respect a person's autonomy and their consent,
Right. And in this particular case, the doctor said no, that person's an
Yeah.
adult.
And that, yeah. Yeah.
And thank goodness.
Yeah.
You know, now I'm going to say also that the mother was born in 1922. So
Right.
we are not, you know, probably going with old school at that point.
Right.
So,
Right. Right. Yeah. This would have been many, many years ago.
Right. Exactly.
So,
but
yeah.
look at that. It's 30-minute mark.
I know, right? Like, and like you were saying, like we could talk about this a lot. And there is, I mean, there are really complex discussions to be had about this book.
Oh, I think that if people watching, if you're in a book club, pick this title, because it'll be one of those ones where you will not have to pull teeth about getting people to talk. It will be a great discussion.
Yeah.
It's so rich. It's so well written. It's one of those stories that's, you're going to throw it against the wall, but not because it's a horrible book. You're going to throw it against the wall because you are so mad at how these characters are being treated by the other characters. And you will, she made them very human. Yeah. Even the villains were human.
Yeah. Actually, there was one we didn't talk about, and that's Dr. Townsend's son.
He was lovely.
Well, he was and he wasn't, but I mean, you have to understand he was 14.
He was 14 and he'd just gotten his heart stomped on.
Yeah. So he really, I mean, he's kind of an example of someone being in a really, really difficult position and if he doesn't do the right thing the first time, he tries to make amends for it after. So I think he was a really interesting addition.
Well, you know what? Here's an interesting thing too that just occurred to me as we go over the 30-minute mark. But he had no autonomy either. His father was grooming him for his position. And then when you drop over into the Nazi Germany side, they didn't have autonomy either. So like, it was very much a story of,
it was like, what were you going to do?
Right. And that was always the argument. Like, do you fight against it or you just go along with it? And in every case, the majority of people let it happen. We let it happen in America, and we let it happen.
Here's the difference between Dr. Townsend's son is that, yes, he really didn't have his autonomy. He was really, but behind the scenes, he did things that he knew that, I mean, if Dr. Townsend had found out, he would have been in huge, huge trouble. But he did them anyway because he knew they were the right things, even though, you know, other characters maybe were more complacent.
That's right. And there were other characters. There's another character who takes power, not necessarily in the best way. Belle, there's a character in there that is a little bit of sex crazed. But for really good reasons, why she's mentally ill. But she uses that as her power. And so again, there's a lot of subtext about power in this too. I can't recommend this book enough. I'm going to sing its praises left and right all year long. So.
Good choice. I think that was your choice as well.
I think we added it. Yeah, we said we wanted to read it because we got to do.
I think that was one that you added to the list, and I'm very glad you did because it was a great book.
So I'm going to put the cover back up again so you guys all see it. I think it's hardcover.
It is indeed hardcover and Kindle right now.
Right. I think it's her. I don't know if it's her first hardcover or second, but it's about time she was in that.
Yep.
And I will put the buy links up in the notes for YouTube, and we'll stick the buy links up on our Facebook group.
All right.
And let's move on to some happier notes because we've got fun stuff coming up now.
We do.
We're not going to be all about eugenics.
Right. So I think it's 2 weeks' time. We're going to be back with our next writer's room, and we're going to talk about point of view. So that's going to be interesting. Because we both, in our most recent works, you and I both took a different tack than we normally or historically have with point of view. And so there've been some challenges with that and some really great things with that. And so it'll be interesting to talk about point of view. And then in June, the first week of June, we're going to talk for our next book chat is going to be Sarah Penner's The London Seance Society.
Yep.
So we're excited about that because we read The Last Apothecary and that was lovely. And we like that. And then our author of the month, our featured author next month, is Bryn Turnbull, who's another Canadian. She wrote The Last Grand Duchess, which we read last year and really
I really liked.
Yeah, and this year she's got The Paris Deception out, and we're really looking forward to that. That's an art, the heist book, I think. Yes.
Yeah, the art forgery.
Art forgery, that's right.
Yeah, which sounds so cool. It's about fooling the Nazis who were trying to loot the art and fooling them with forgeries.
Right.
Which sounds really different and a nice different angle on World War II, and I'm really excited to read that. We should tell you that London Society is out. The London Seance Society. It's been out since the beginning of April. And the Paris Deception is out May 30th.
Yes.
So both will be out by the time we chat with them. So everyone has no excuse now to buy all 3 of these books.
We have no shame with adding to your TBR.
I know. I kind of feel like we should do a book club. Like, join us and be a book club, people.
Yeah.
Because these are great books, and I've really enjoyed reading them. And I think you're really going to like both of those books. If you haven't read London Seance Society, which sat on the Times list, I think, for a while. So
yeah, I haven't read it. I've got it. Haven't read it yet. I also have an early copy of The Paris Deception. Haven't read it yet either. I try to read them closer to our times so that everything in the book is like really fresh.
I have read the Seance Society, and I liked it. Spoiler, I liked it, but and she put herself up quite a challenge because it's very hard to follow up when your first book explodes the way her first book did. So she had quite a challenge. We'll discuss whether or not she met it or if
exceeded it
or whatever. So
all right. Well, I think that's it for us for this week.
I think so. I hope if you liked it, you'll subscribe to our story, to Step Into the Story on YouTube, or join our Facebook community at facebook.com/groups/Step Into the Story.
That was a mouthful. All right.
Okay. We will see you all later. Bye-bye.